Hello, I'm Anawoltos, and today I wanted to talk about this system of government that I had described a while back, and now I want to actually visualize it in some sense as compared to, let's say, the government of the United States in this particular instance. So, as you may be seeing based on the graphic that I am certainly editing into the video right now, what you see is two sets. On the left, we have the type of government that I propose. On the right is the type of government that currently exists in the United States. Now, I'm not saying that this is something I'm proposing to the United States. This is something that I think should theoretically work in any civilization, regardless of its technological development or its geographic scope. And that is why I think that this government is actually in some ways superior. It is because of its flexibility. But I'm actually going to talk about this exact thing here. So let's first look at what you have with the United States on the right. So I have the people at the bottom, and the people elect the various types of government that are above them. So in the United States, the people can vote for their local governments, as well as the state governments and the federal governments of the United States, of the entire country. Now, what's interesting about this is that by directly voting for the higher levels of government, in my opinion, that actually reduces the accountability rather than increasing it, because it means that the individuals who are in government are held accountable toward a wider and more distant group. And by increasing the number of people you're accountable to, what actually ends up happening is that you cannot have a meaningful an opportunity for meaningful interaction with all of them. And what that means is that very frequently the individuals who end up going to the higher levels of government end up getting out of touch with the people. In addition, the distance between them allows for an ease of spreading misinformation, because if it's someone you don't personally know, then it's a lot easier for someone to make things up, and that's where you get the fake news coming into the equation. So therefore, I would conclude that although in some instances, such as really small countries, it might work to have the national government be directly voted for by the people, the larger a country is, the less efficient and the less effective and the more easily to corrupt this system becomes. In the United States, what we also have is that the higher powers have unilateral power over the lower groups. So the federal government, for example, can unilaterally make decisions against the state government. Now, of course, in the United States, this is constitutionally limited. However, the Constitution had been changed a while back, so that whereas there used to be representation from the state governments at the federal level in the form of a Senate, that has now been popularized, or in essence, it has been instead transferred to the people to elect the senators, which means that the state government actually has no particular representation in the legislature of the United States as a whole, which means that federal government decisions can be applied unilaterally towards state governments, assuming that they are not found unconstitutional. The same applies for other levels of government. Now, different laws are different depending on which state in the United States, so it might not always be the same, but generally speaking, the higher levels of government have unilateral or one-sided ability to make determinations for the lower levels of government. And another instance of this is also in the sense that there is generally no concept of a vote of no confidence in the United States, where in some other countries you might be able to say that you don't like what the people who are currently in power are doing, so you're going to vote them out for doing something that you don't like, which is not necessarily something that is illegal. But in the United States, you actually have to wait for their terms to be over before being able to vote them out. So that's another problem. And the final thing I would like to note is that the diplomatic, military, social, and economic authorities are entirely within the power of the federal government. Now, some strict constitutionalists might say that this should not be so. However, in practice, this is true, in the sense that, of course, you would want diplomatic power to be on the top level. That is something that is obviously should be on the top level. Military power is also a good thing to have centralized to some extent. But then social and economic authority is also on the federal government. There's the Department of Agriculture, and not just those particular categories. There's also a Department of Education and other things that are on the federal level, which means that legislature can, in many respects, end up taking a one-size-fits-all type course, which ultimately disadvantages minority views among the people. And therefore, I view this government as being, in many ways, largely inefficient and easily corruptible. Now, what I have here, on the other hand, is the type of government that I had been developing, where the people vote for a local or communal government. Now, the term communal, in my sense, I'm referring to a community, and in many countries it is customary to have municipalities referred to as communes, but this has nothing to do with socialism, although if you want to, it can, and that's why this is more flexible, because social and economic authority is placed largely on that communal government, where the communities that people live in can decide which type of social system and which type of economic system they want to enact, whether it be more free market or a bit more syndicalist, socialist, even communist. Now, of course, there would be a central constitution that would limit the full scope of things so that individuals would not be able to essentially do anything they want, because that would be disadvantageous. And of course, there would also be the potential for various communities to group together and have similar values for convenience sake. And of course, there's then intermediate levels of government, but I'm not going to talk about those at the moment. But at the top, you've got the state government, and by state, I'm referring to the country or the nation state. Now, the reason I prefer to use the term state instead of nation is because I don't think that that nativity is particularly relevant when running a government, but that's just my opinion on that. But of course, the state government would have the full diplomatic authority and would, of course, have the major military authority. However, in my particular system, I would allow each level of government to have its own armed forces, or at least have a right to establish its own armed forces. And in most cases, on the local level, this would manifest in the establishment of police. However, if there is terrorism in a region, it would make sense for me for a region to regionally establish a military to counteract terrorism in a region. That would obviously make sense to me. But then there's the sub-state government, which is the first level division, and of course, in my view, the way that constitutional amendments would be made in this type of government is that you would have to have a unanimous vote of each of the sub-state governments, in essence meaning that each of those sub-state governments needs to reach a majority, and if each one reaches a majority, then you have a unanimity, and then at the communal level, you need a majority of the communities as well to deal with this. Now, you may ask, what is the intermediate level? The intermediate level is the level is essentially any level between the sub-state and the communal levels that are necessary for ease of administration and arbitration. Because, of course, one important aspect of higher levels of government would be to arbitrate disputes between lower levels of government. So these intermediate levels could potentially be infinite. So essentially, I'm giving this type of state the flexibility to potentially expand infinitely. And I think that's very important for government, that it should be able to expand infinitely. And of course, the way that you would then have to divide administrations would then be decided by the higher levels of government, that when a certain threshold is reached in members of whichever government has these delegations coming to them, then they are split. And then when that reaches again, it splits. Or if it gets too small, then there's a merger that occurs that is arbitrated by a higher level of government. Now, I would like to emphasize that this system is not a federal system, nor does it acknowledge the idea of a social contract. And the reason I don't do a federal system is because I don't think that federalism is really necessary, because federalism, of course, implies that there is a pre-existent sovereignty between the various substates, which I do not necessarily agree is a necessary thing. So I'm essentially trying to make something that would fit in multiple situations. And social contract, because I don't think that the social contract is really a valid statement as existing anyway. But anyway, going back to it, so the way this would work is at the bottom, the people would, in each municipality, would have the authority to elect their communal government, and their communal government is can be elected any number of different ways. There's actually a very wide range of this, and the communal government then, whichever positions are elected, need to have the full authority to replace whichever positions are appointed, which means that it should not be possible for someone to give someone an appointed position that if a new administration comes in, that person can't be removed. That should not be possible. The idea is that the government should be completely and fully replaceable in its membership. So, additionally speaking, the leader of each communal government, whether it be led in a more parliamentary system or in a more monarchic system, the leader then selects and appoints a delegate to send to a higher level of government, which would probably be one of the intermediate levels. And all those delegates can have their delegacy revoked at any time by the leader and be replaced. Additionally, when the delegates come together, they form the intermediate levels of government. Then they elect a leader, and I want to emphasize here that it is important to note that under this system, I would have it so that you would not be able to serve in two different governmental capacities at the same time. In other words, you can't serve as a delegate and as a parliamentary leader. at the same time. And so then whoever comes out as the leader then gets to appoint whoever gets sent up next, and it goes up and up and up until you reach the actual state. And the idea of this is that it builds accountability by ensuring that each level of government has a group that it is directly accountable to in an easy manner. And you might say, well, what about low political engagement? Well, this should not be as much a problem if the social and economic authority are indeed placed in the power of a local government, because that means that you might have a potential for a large amount of change happening at a very local level, which means individuals would have a natural interest in being at least cognizant of what is happening on their local level. So the idea is that then those people would elect trusted leaders who would then themselves elect people that they trust. And therefore you have a essentially a pyramid of trust, where at the bottom you've got the people, then your communal government, intermediate government, sub-state, and then the state itself. And what this is supposed to do is that it's supposed to refine the authority and the trust of and the integrity, actually, of the leaders in the government, so that by the time you're at the top, you have individuals who are political experts, because I reject the idea of going against the idea of career politicians, because I think that if you have an expert, I think it would be better to have an expert. So, of course, if you trust someone to be capable of government, then of course that person would theoretically be able to make it higher up in the system. And therefore, at the top, you're going to have political experts and individuals who have a lot of trust in them. And because they're split off from the people, mass media and marketing campaigns for political candidates would not occur other than on the local level, because all the other individuals would be easily and directly accountable. Now, actually, I'm thinking that perhaps the appointment system might not be the best. It might be better to have 3 elections on each level, one for the parliamentary leader, one for the military leader, and one for the delegate that is then sent up. That might be a better system, but those are the minutiae. But essentially what I'm saying here is that this system on the left creates more accountability and avoids corruption, and theoretically would allow for infinite expansion, while the system on the right reduces accountability the larger it gets and increases in corruption the larger it gets. So that's my opinion on that. Tell me what you think. Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm wrong? Do you think that maybe there's a better system that I have not considered? Is there a particular flaw that you sense in my system? I'm very happy to hear anything that anyone has to say about it, because I would indeed like to reform and to refine my particular political ideology to a level that really helps take care of whichever problems would arise. Now, of course, this is not all of what this system is about. There's actually a lot of minutiae that I haven't gotten into, but I would be happy to get into that. So if there's any questions, please do leave them in the comments section below. So thank you all for watching, and I will be seeing you all next time on Awiltus. Over and out.